What's going on, everybody? Kalipas Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the Google Pixel 6a. Now definitely stay tuned because I will be making my full review and several tips and tricks videos for this phone, but in this video I'm just going to be going over some basic specs and features and my first initial thoughts about it to give you a better idea of what you can expect. Now before we go any further, as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button, but with that being said, let's get started. Now before we actually get into the phone itself, let's take a look at what comes in the box. So it's pretty basic here, there's really not a whole lot to it. We got the standard USB-C cable, we got a SIM card removal tool here, and then we also got a quick start guide as well as some safety and warranty information. So again, definitely pretty basic stuff. There's no wall adapter, unfortunately. A lot of phones, especially the more mid-range and higher end ones, don't have wall adapters anymore. So again, if you don't have one already, you will have to go and buy one. Now getting into the phone itself, with the Google Pixel 6a, we're getting a 6.1-inch OLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 429, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen to body ratio of about 83%. So despite not being the largest display out there, I do think it still looks really good. The bezels are decently thin, giving it a nice modern, more minimalistic look, and the OLED display technology is going to give us some nice bold colors, as well as great brightness and viewing angles. So if you're outside, for example, in the sun, the phone is still going to be really easy to see. In addition to this, the 1080p resolution is going to give us a nice, sharp, crisp image, which is going to be great for content consumption. So if you're streaming videos, playing a game, looking at photos, whatever you happen to be doing, everything is going to look really good on this phone. We also got pretty good dimensions here, so with a 20:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a much more immersive experience, and you're also going to get a better scrolling experience when you're doing stuff like reading or using social media. So overall, again, the display isn't really the biggest out there, so if you want something a little bit larger, then in this price range, there are definitely some better options out there, but I do feel like the quality more than makes up for it, because again, this display really does look nice. So far, the only thing I really see that could be better is giving it a higher refresh rate, because this is a 60Hz display, and in this price range, pretty much every phone is going to have at least a 90, if not 120Hz display. So compared to the competitors, that is a little bit of a disadvantage. But again, other than that, the display on this phone is really great. Now for storage, this phone does have 128GB of internal storage, which is definitely a decent amount, but unfortunately, there's no microSD card expansion here. Now this is a pretty common thing with higher end phones, like for example, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE and the iPhone SE as well. Those entry-level flagship phones don't have microSD card expansion, but there are other phones around this price range, like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, for example, that are sort of on a similar level, maybe not quite as high-end as this phone, but really kind of getting there, and most of those phones still do have microSD card expansion. So if storage is really an important thing for you, then definitely keep this in mind. But in my opinion, 128GB of internal storage is perfectly fine, and in this situation, I'm going to guess most people probably aren't going to need a microSD card anyway. Now this phone does not have wireless charging, which is another drawback I see compared to other phones like it, like the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE and the iPhone SE, and I really feel like a phone in this price range kind of should. I mean, wireless charging isn't the most important feature in the world, but at the same time, this is really sort of an entry-level flagship phone, and when other phones like it have wireless charging and this phone doesn't, it really just adds to the features that this phone doesn't have and other phones do. So whether or not you actually like wireless charging, I know a lot of people have kind of mixed feelings about it. I feel like in this day and age, when you're paying almost $600 for a phone, a basic feature like wireless charging is something it really should have. Now for security features, this phone does have a fingerprint scanner right here in the display, and it does work really well. Let's try that one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, it's really fast and responsive, and it feels great as well. Not only does having an in-display fingerprint scanner give the phone a more premium feel, but the functionality is also real nice and solid, so I definitely like that. Now unfortunately, this phone doesn't have Face Unlock, and that is a little bit of a disappointment, because even though most people are probably going to be perfectly fine with just a fingerprint scanner, it just goes back to the concept that a lot of other phones in this price range have both a fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock, and although there are some phones like iPhones, for example, that only have one or the other, having both options is always a nice thing. But at least the fingerprint scanner does work, and I would say compared to other phones out there, it's probably one of the better ones in this price range. Now for the camera setup, with the selfie camera, this camera is 8 megapixels and it has a nice looking hole punch design. Nothing really out of the ordinary here. I feel like pretty much every phone in this price range and a little above and a little below all have pretty much the same exact selfie camera, but I'm definitely not complaining because I do think it looks really good. Then on the back here, we got a dual camera setup with a 12.2 megapixel main camera and a 12 megapixel megapixel ultra wide camera, so pretty minimalistic design here. Now unfortunately there's no macro camera here. I'm not completely sure how many people actually use that feature, but if it is an important feature for you, then this might be disappointing for you. But aside from that, as far as features go, it does have pretty much everything else, so it's not really bad. Now if you want to learn more about the actual camera specs and features and the photo and video quality, definitely stay tuned for my later videos because I will be going over all this in a lot more detail. But for now, I will say this phone does have plenty of camera features, and I do expect the photo and video quality to be pretty good as well. Now speaking of video quality, this phone can record in up to 4K at 60 frames per second in the rear camera and 1080p at 30 frames per second in the front. Now this is a little disappointing for the front-facing camera because there are phones out there like the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G for example, which is pretty much half this phone's price. They can record 4K videos in both the rear and the front cameras. Now granted, the actual quality of this phone's videos are probably going to be a little bit better, but I'm not really sure why they didn't give this phone 4K capability in the front-facing camera as well. Now as far as the RAM and processor go, this phone is getting 6GB of RAM with the Google Tensor processor, and from my limited time using it, it has been pretty fast. I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test here, and it came back with a single core score of 1055 and a multi-core score of 2956. Now by itself, this score might not mean a whole lot to you, so I do recommend running this test on your current phone and comparing your scores to these to see whether or not this phone would be an upgrade for you, because depending on what you have, it may or may not be. Of course, if you have an entry-level or mid-range phone, this phone is probably going to be quite a bit faster, but if you're coming from like an older iPhone or maybe a Samsung Galaxy S20 or something, then it's going to be a lot more ambiguous. So definitely run the test on your current phone and compare your results to these, because again, these scores don't really mean a whole lot unless you have something to compare them to. But that being said, I will say, again, in my experience, this phone has been pretty fast. I haven't really gotten a chance to do a whole lot with it, but from what I have done, I haven't had any performance issues whatsoever. It's been running pretty much exactly how I expected it to. So if you are looking for a phone that has near flagship level performance, but don't quite want to spend $1,400 on something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, then so far this phone does seem like a pretty good alternative. Now for the battery, this phone has a 4410 mAh battery. I love when they have such a weirdly specific size. It also supports 18-watt fast charging, so it's not the largest battery or the strongest fast charging out there, but it definitely is still good and it measures up pretty well to other phones in this price range. Now just like with the processor, I haven't really gotten a whole lot of a chance to really see how the battery performs, but I'll definitely be letting you guys know how it works out in my future videos. Now, although I haven't actually even experienced one full charge on this phone yet, according to the actual battery settings, the battery life per charge of this phone looks to be about the same as pretty much every other phone in this price range. So while it's not going to be exceptionally long, it definitely will be good, and compared to something like an iPhone for example, it is going to be a lot better than that. Now as far as the fast charging goes, 18-watt fast charging is definitely not bad. Sure, it's not the strongest out there, but it absolutely will make a difference if you don't have a whole lot of time to charge up your phone, and if you have a strong enough fast charger, it will save you some time. But that being said, remember, this phone doesn't come with a wall adapter, so you are going to have to get one yourself, but that being said, it's not really a bad thing since most wall adapters that come with phones typically only end up being 5 watts anyway. But again, if you don't have one already, in order to actually use the full power of this phone's fast charging, you will have to get an 18-watt wall adapter. Now as far as other features go, unsurprisingly, this phone does have NFC, so if you do like to make mobile contactless payments, you can with this phone no problem. But now that we've gone over some of the specs and features, let's take a closer look at the phone itself. So on the left side here, not a whole lot going on, but we do have the slot for the SIM card right here. And remember, again, with this phone, there's no micro SD card expansion, so definitely keep this in mind. On the bottom here, we got a USB-C port, the microphone, and the speaker. Notice there's no headphone jack, which again, for a phone in this price range, really isn't very surprising anymore. Most of the flagship phones and higher end mid-range phones don't have them, so if you do want to use normal wired headphones, you are going to have to get an adapter. Now, do I really like this? No, I definitely don't. I feel like phones should have headphone jacks, especially these mid-range phones, but unfortunately, that is just how things are, so definitely keep this in mind. On the right side here, we got the volume down, volume up, power key. Now I'm going to be honest here, I'm not a big fan of this button layout. For some weird reason, I keep thinking the power key is going to be right here and the volume keys are going to be right here. Now this is obviously really just my personal preference. I feel like a lot of people aren't going to care either way, but to me, I feel like it would have been better if the power key was down here and the volume key was on the opposite spot, but it is what it is, and the button quality itself is really good, so I can't really complain too much. On the top of the phone, we got the noise cancelling microphone. And on the back, we got our camera module and our flash, and Google branding right here. I really like how the camera module looks. This stripe here almost reminds me of the Samsung Galaxy S10. It definitely looks really nice. As far as the material goes, it does have sort of a glossy finish and it kind of picks up some fingerprints, but I feel like in this video you can't even see them. So it's definitely not too bad. But in the right lighting, they are visible, so keep this in mind. But in general, as far as aesthetics go, I do think this phone looks really nice. It has a decently slim design, so it's not going to be too bulky or anything. The materials and build quality are really solid, and it also has a decent amount of weight to it, so it doesn't feel cheap at all. So in conclusion, my final thoughts about the Google Pixel 6a. From my experience so far, I do think this is going to be a really nice phone. It has a great looking display, a decent amount of features, and really good aesthetics, build quality, and materials all around. I definitely do think it's a solid higher end mid-range phone, and despite not having some features like wireless charging and a higher refresh rate that other phones in this price range do, the phone's overall quality and performance more than make up for this. So I'm definitely looking forward to using this phone more and really seeing what it can do. But this concludes my first look at the Google Pixel 6a. If you enjoyed the video, definitely give it a thumbs up, and if you want to learn more about this phone, be sure to subscribe to the channel because I will be making plenty of videos about it in the near future. But that's it for this video. Be sure to follow Kalipus Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next one.